Welcome to our webinar series, the Tokenization of Securities. My name is Chris Berg, host of the Sound DeFi podcast. Today, we got some special guests. We're going to be focused on custody challenges in a multi-chain environment. So I'm going to go around here and have each person introduce themselves. And then Pat O'Meara, the president of Inveniam, will give us a chance to get a little bit more into this topic. Let's start with Simon Barbme. He is the CMO of Archax. Simon, welcome back. It's great to see you.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Pat. Hi, fellow panelists. Great to be back on another of these webinars today from a slightly cold and damp London and strike-ridden London too. Simon Barbme, Chief Marketing and Commercial Officer here at Archax. For those unfamiliar with Archax, we are an FCA-regulated digital asset exchange, broker, and custodian. So very focused on the digital asset space, from crypto to regulated instruments too, and very focused on an institutional grade approach. In the process of rolling out our first products and services at the moment, custodian service is live, and our exchange is running in stealth mode at the moment in preparation for live, but pleased to be here today.
Great to have you, Simon. Also, Pat Lavecchia, CEO of Oasis Pro Markets. Pat, welcome back. Great to see you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Pat, for the invitation. Honored to be on this panel with all the participants. Really looking forward to today's call. I'm in Connecticut right now, New York City area in Darien. Oasis Pro is a fintech holding company. Our primary subsidiaries is Oasis Pro Markets, which is an investment bank and a ATS for digital securities. We're unique because we can actually transact digital cash, stablecoins, CBDCs, Bitcoin and ETH for digital securities here in the U.S. We're institutionally focused. We also have integrated, and we'll be talking about this in a bit, with a number of different platforms, and working on the custodial puzzle right now with Inveniam that we'll chat about in a bit as well. Thank you for thank you for inviting me.
Pat, it's great to have you as always. Also, Anthony Basili, head of asset allocators at Coinbase. Anthony, great to see you again as well.
Yeah, wonderful to be here. Thanks again. So as I mentioned, I lead the asset allocators business for Coinbase. I'm also responsible for Coinbase Institutional, specifically our efforts on tokenization of digital assets and real-world assets. So folks generally know the exchange for Coinbase that serves 110 retail users. We also have an institutional business that serves hedge funds, venture funds, pensions, endowments, and other large asset owners. We're a qualified custodian with more than 80 billion assets under custody. And I think one of the things that we want to focus on today is the launch of Base, which is our layer 2 blockchain, and that being a smart contract execution layer for a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in tokenization. Also the need for large institutional investors to have qualified custody access that we bring to the table. So excited to be here and partnering with you all.
Anthony, welcome back. Great to see you. Daniel Coer, one of the co-founders of Tokeny. Daniel, always great to see you. And yes.
Hey, Chris, can I jump in real quick? And Anthony, just as a clarification, you have 110 million customers, not 110 customers. Is that right?
110 million. That's right.
Yes.
Retail customers.
Yeah. So the 110 was less impressive when you left out the word million. But but I wanted to make that distinction. I think most people knew it, but that's an impressive number. I wanted to clarify that. Sorry, Chris, for messing up the mojo of the show.
No problem. I know Anthony, got a chance to meet him in Miami. He was just being modest, so appreciate that about you, Anthony. Daniel Coer, one of the co-founders of Tokeny. Always great to see you. Daniel, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Chris, and very pleased to be here. So Daniel, I'm responsible for business development strategy at Tokeny, headquartered in Luxembourg. So Tokeny has been developing the sole framework that exists today in the industry to represent financial instrument in a compliant way on public chain. We have more than 80 customers. 80. Anthony, I know you count in millions, so it's not 80 million, so don't correct me, Patrick, it's 80. But nevertheless, all institutional customers with 28 billion of assets represented, agnostic in terms of jurisdiction, agnostic in terms of assets, with a very strong institutional focus, working with a company like Apex to bring thousands of funds on public chain in the coming years. and very excited to be sharing this panel with you guys.
Thank you. Great to see you again, Daniel. Marin Kukoc, he's a product director at Inveniam. And Marin, great to meet you, and thanks for joining us.
Great to meet you, Chris. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm a product director for the ecosystem at Inveniam. So I focus on how our data operating system connects to our partner companies, and that trusted, secure asset data gets kind of proliferated throughout the digital trading ecosystem around us.
Thank you. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And then Bruce Jackson, welcome back, Chief of Digital Asset Funds at Apex Group. Great to see you, Bruce.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks, Pat and Inveniam, for inviting me. So I'm Chief of Digital Asset Funds and Business at Apex. My career has been as an asset manager, specifically as an alternative asset manager, and came into this role as a client of Apex's. So Apex, in a nutshell, we administer about $3 trillion in alternative funds. My role is to manage the end-to-end for our GP clientele who are looking to use the blockchain as their ledger, look to use the blockchain as their distribution platform. So, we basically administer the end-to-end service for them to do that. We also have, 60 or 70 crypto funds that we also administer, but our core focus is on helping our existing alternative fund managers tokenize their product and effectively distribute, sell more product, quite frankly, using blockchain as a ledger.
Thanks for being here, Bruce. And again, great to see you. And the person who has brought all these wonderful minds together, the CEO of Inveniam, Pat O'Meara. And Pat, I just want to say thank you for being the brain trust behind this webinar series and what you did in Miami. I had a lot of great feedback in Miami, people thanking you for putting these webinar series together. And obviously, Miami is just a tremendous success. So the floor is yours, my friend.
Well, thank you. I wanna wish everybody that a happy eve of St. Patrick's Day. I think that we need to stay focused on that probably throughout the day as we prepare for tomorrow's festivities. But it's great to have all of these great companies on the line who are innovating in their own unique roles. In some cases, similar functions in different geographies. So Pat and Simon have some very similar functions where they're regulated in different geographies. But also, the collaboration that's needed within this ecosystem for it to fully function is represented on this call and on all of these calls. So it's good to be with everybody. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. And I think what I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is, Daniel, I want to jump in with you. The topic today is dealing in a multi-chain environment, right? This is different for bearer instruments than it is with securities, right? And you guys have been, you have 80 clients. You've been on this journey for a long time. You're tokenizing on multiple chains. Talk to us about how you think about the chains that you're tokenizing on, where you want to go, what's next in line for Tokeny, and then talk to us about, as you use multiple chains, what you guys have been doing from a custody solution. What's the solution you're using today, and what do we think the solution's going to be a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now? Where's it going to evolve to? But I'd love to just hear about what you're doing now and how you think about that.
Sure. Thank you very much, Matt. Well, first of all, the positioning of Tokeny has always been to be an enabler of an ecosystem. Our role and mission is to leverage the framework that we have developed for the last 6 years to enable to represent digital assets in a compliant way on any infrastructure that is EVM compatible. So we're not there to force clients to go one way or the other. We are there to enable them to have choice. So your first question was about the underlying chain. We, from the very beginning, has decided to be EVM compatible. We started by implementing our solution on Ethereum very quickly. That means 2 years ago, we migrated to Polygon, and now we have also implemented Avalanche, and we are definitely looking at other chains, such as the Coinbase base chain, obviously, to broaden our capability. But that decision is the one of our customer. So we are not forcing them to go one way or the other. We just want to give them the ability to make the decision that is right for them, and also to provide a mechanism eventually, if that would be required, to move from one chain to the other in the case that one network would be compromised. We actually developed a protocol when we migrated from Ethereum to Polygon to enable to do such a migration in just a couple of minutes. As we are using permission token, we always have visibility on the most current and updated cap table on those securities. So we are in a position to burn the token on one chain and create exactly the same position on another chain, which again give confidence to our customers that once they make a decision or choice on what chain to go for, this is not something that is not reversible. So in terms of custody, there again, from the very beginning, we decided to be allowing third-party solution to use the Tokeny platform. So we work with any wallet that is ERC20 compatible. The broader reach would be someone that wants to use his MetaMask could do that. The other extreme is if you want to use solution such as Fireblocks, Copper, Metaco, Ledger, and others. We have discussion with all of them. We are compatible with all of them, and it remains the decision of the customer to pick up one solution versus the other. What I would like to say, however, and I do see a lot of confusion when we refer to custody. Custody in the traditional terms or financial terms, which is really to safeguard the assets, and not every asset is subject to custody. If you manage, for example, a fund, typically it is the role of the asset servicer to manage the cap table, and he's also keeping the position of his investors in this cap table, and custodying in a way this ledger. But the customer in such an example does not custody himself his position, the asset of that fund. So there's not necessarily an obligation to have a custody solution for every asset in traditional financial terms. In the crypto world, that's totally different, because here the custody solution is really to prove the ownership of those assets. When you have an asset that is represented on the blockchain, the asset is in the blockchain. What you have in your wallet is the representation of your ownership that sits in the blockchain, and the mean for you to identify yourself as the owner, which is to sign transaction. In that sense, and especially if you work with a permission token, such as the one that we are creating, the level of security of the custody solution is not that relevant, because it's based on your identity, and in that case, the token is linked to your identity, and your wallet is used to sign transaction, identify yourself as the owner, of course, but to sign transaction. It's no different than using DocuSign in that sense. And that's a very important differentiation to make, because again, unlike on permissionless chain, such as Bitcoin, if you lose your private key, you lose your assets. On a permission tokens, if you lose your private key, you just change the wallet that is assigned to your identity to recover your access. So, and that's a very important difference to make.
And I think you brought up the topic here of permissioned versus permissioned chains versus permissionless chains. And on a permissionless chain like Ethereum, you have permissioned tokens, right? And I think there's a distinction between a permissioned token on a permissionless chain and a permissioned chain. And Goldman Sachs will use them as an example. We were going to invite them, but they had some travel issues because of the tube strike or the train strike here in England. And so Matthew had not made it into his office yet. So we apologize. But he is, they chose to go with DAML, a permissioned chain. And we heard from ADDX and SDAX, because of the regulators, that they began on a permissioned chain, right? Versus a permissioned token on a permissionless chain. And a lot of banks have done that because of the OCC and the Fed have pushed them to go to permissioned chains as a way to start right now. But all of them say they want to go to permissionless eventually, because it makes no sense to be on a permissioned chain. But your discussion of a permissioned token on a permissionless chain is a significant distinction. And I think what I'd like to do is, if I can, Pat Lavecchia, I'd like for you to talk for a minute about this. You guys, I'd like for you to talk about kind of where you began. And you came from a permissionless world, right? Oasis Pro Markets, your very origins came from that. Talk about how you think about this, and what is Oasis Pro Markets doing? How do you think about custody? Who's working with you from a custodian, and where are we from a single custodian, morphing into a multi-custodial world?
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Yeah, it's very interesting. So we're very close with MakerDAO, which is a DeFi protocol, and that's completely permissionless. My background is 25 plus years TradFi, Credit Suisse, which is still around as of right now, and I hope they continue, and Bear Stearns, so we started down the path of completely permissionless, but it became quite obvious for us as we were going through the process with the SEC, FINRA, other regulators that as we've explored other licenses, that at least in the short term, to be defined, that complete utilizing the blockchain as a source of truth, which was the initial approach, wasn't going to work. Also, frankly, they did us a benefit because our original plan was for everything, including the order book on an ATS, to be on chain. Now, you put in a bid or an ask, you would pay gas fees. At the time we started this process, several years ago, gas fees were low. Gas fees took off, right? So that would have really killed the business model in regards to going down, and who would put in an order book if you didn't have certainty or a bid or an ask that you were actually going to get a transaction done, right? And have to pay gas fees. So we're completely off chain until the transaction's completed, and then it's on chain. Now, we've moved to a combination of both, from a tokenization standpoint and integration into our platform, of a combination of permissioned, one of which is our own, based on Hyperledger and Besu, as an alternative to our to potential clients, and a combination of both permission and permissionless, very agnostic in regards to, similar to Daniel, what the client wants, what they feel comfortable with. So we're currently integrated with, I can mention 4, and we'll soon be at 10 platforms. So Ethereum, of course, Polygon, Matic, Optimism, which is tied to Coinbase. In regards to Base 2, we're already integrated with Optimism and Avalanche, and we're expanding that across the board. We also have a transfer agent, which is SEC registered, and that's all integrated as well. And the other 6 that I mentioned, 4 of them are permissioned, because we are institutionally focused, and the path forward there is, again, in the short term, could be a year, it could be 5 years, until the regulators, at least here in the US, get completely comfortable with the blockchain, which they are not as of yet. But I think everyone on this call will agree we've made great strides. Now this is the year of tokenization. That's not us saying this. This is the major infrastructure players and money center banks, et cetera. So great strides have occurred to get us here. Now, in regards to custody, so right now here in the U.S., there's self-custodial wallets. There are approvals for that. We could do that on our primary marketplace, but the regulators really aren't happy with self-custodial wallets as of yet. Eventually, that'll get there. So right now here in the U.S., you have this one custodial model, and we're working with Inveniam to improve that. Now, currently we have several custodians. I could mention one, Anchorage, major bank. They have the ability to hold digital assets, and we can do immediate atomic swaps within their system off of our ATS. We have 3 others in place as well, but they haven't been announced yet, so I'm just not able to mention it right now. But the major players, State Street, Northern Trust, Bank of New York Mellon, are all moving into digital asset securities, and I would hope within the next year they will be in this sandbox as well. We're working with Inveniam, Pat, as you know, regarding facilitating working cross-custodian, and we think we have a very unique and exciting proposition And that's really a bottleneck right now. Transfer agents are a bottleneck, certain transfer agents here in the U.S., but the custodian setup here in the U.S., until that's solved, where your account at State Street and my account at Anchorage can actually do a transaction on the blockchain, until that is solved, we're still going to be, in the early stages here. I think I answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we talk about some of the challenges associated with a multi-custodial environment, is just simple things like messaging, right? The messaging between the custodians and even very simple things like, can you confer data to a custodian and have that custodian rely on your communication on behalf of the client, right? And then the next thing, the custodians touching base with each other. What is their mechanism of messaging? In the public markets and the equities, we would consider that like a fix hub, right? And that's what we're building with Pat and to deliver this multi-custodial messaging system so that they can communicate and perform the functions they need to, where people are trading assets that rely on exemptions, right? Not just a bearer instrument. And that's really a big piece. Marin's leading a bunch of that work, and we'll get to that in a minute. And Anthony, I'm going to use that as the topic to just come over to you. You're in the custodial business. You're in the custodial business in a big way for crypto, and you're leaning into tokenized real world assets, right? And there are other considerations. Talk to us about kind of your thinking as a custodian, as you think about multi-chain, a multi-custodial world for settling securities that have exemptions that you need to be able to ensure that you're relying on them, et cetera, right? As you want to lean into this space. So Anthony, give us kind of your 2 cents about Coinbase, how you got where you are today and where you think you're going.
Yeah, I like where we're going with this conversation and from a depth perspective. So I appreciate the comments made and the distinctions are really important. So just stepping back for a moment, if you think about Coinbase Institutional, as I mentioned, we serve hedge funds, venture funds, asset owners, insurance pools, et cetera. So all large institutional investors. There's a number of things that become interesting in that, which is our job is to keep their keys safe, right, and keep their assets in their wallets. And then give them access to liquidity, give them access to markets so they can transact. And so there's 2 ways to do that. So the first version is our traditional prime custody offering, where we keep digital assets safe, and we use cold storage today. We also offer a MPC-backed self-hosted wallet that's part of the Prime ecosystem. So our institutional clients come into Coinbase Prime, they keep the majority of their activity in their traditional Prime wallet, which is part of our QC. And then when they want to start to engage on the public chains, they use the MPC-backed self-hosted wallet. And so today, what that looks like is, yep.
Anthony, I'm sorry. I'm just going to ask a couple questions because you've used a couple acronyms, and I think there's some of our listeners who might not know them. Tell us what an MPC wallet is.
Yeah, so MPC is a multi-party computation, and effectively what that means is when you have a wallet, you have a key, you have a private key and a public key. And what a traditional custodian today does is they keep that key safe. So we are a client's agent. They are hiring us to keep their keys safe so they don't have to do it. One of the primary issues today with self-hosted wallets is that you're asking the client, the investor, to keep their own keys safe, right? Or I should say that they're responsible for that. That's probably okay for retail investors who aren't necessarily who are okay with that kind of risk. For an institutional client, that's an absolute no-go the majority of the time. So if you're managing money on behalf of an institution, you're a fiduciary for your client assets, et cetera, you are going to want to outsource that to a professional intermediary who has all the security and products to keep those keys safe for you. You don't want to have redundancy. You want to have multiple people that can have access to the wallet with multiple logins. Rather than one person who can only log in and only one person who can hold the keys.
And Anthony, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so multi-party computation effectively takes those keys and shards them into different pieces and distributes them, so that if there is a loss of that self-hosted key by the account owner, they can be recovered, right? So it's a recovery mechanism for self-hosted wallets, and so that's just something that the industry has developed over years, and I think most of the self-hosted wallet platforms out there offer that, including ourselves today. It's an important one because what now the distinction that was made by the SEC and the custody ruling a few weeks ago is calling into question, though, the ability for institutional investors to use self-hosted wallets, right? And so one of the things we're going to have to grapple with as an institution is if you are managing money as a registered advisor, for example, for clients and you're SEC registered, you're going to have to the expectation is they're going to have to use a qualified custodian. They're not going to be able to use self-hosted wallets. So all of the qualified custodians out there are going to have to really, I should say, level up their game to be able to give access to more and more of the digital assets that are being created across the ecosystem, which requires them to also now have to interact with more chains. So I think that's an important distinction when we talk about permissionless chains, which are public chains, which is our primary orientation, right? So we're primarily focused on Ethereum. We connect to Polygon and a few other chains. We support, from a validator perspective, 27 different blockchains across the Coinbase platform. And so those are all public chains, though. So we don't today integrate with any permissioned private chains. I think our expectation is that you mentioned Goldman using DAML, and we can bring up a few other examples. I think our expectation is that most large enterprises, fast forward some years in the future, are going to have their version of their enterprise chain, where they bring data in, they bring transaction information in that's really specific to their ecosystem, and what that does is it kind of gets all the data in the same standard. Pat, you made this point earlier, which is they're going to want to then allow that data and their client information to then enter the public domain, right? Which are public networks, Ethereum, Base, others. And so I think where this is going for all of the custodian providers, to your point earlier, Pat, is they're going to have to connect to multiple different chains, or at least the assets and the wallet signatures are going to have to be able to interact with multiple chains. And that's going to be the liquidity unlock for why we're wrapping assets in this new technology layer.
One of the, you DAML, as you mentioned with Goldman, they have some neat solutions to create chains, but it's their own chain that then allows you to publish into Ethereum, particularly with smart contracts, and push that out. But I think what we're seeing is that as businesses invest logic in processes in single chain or smart contract specific computation, a smart contract is by its definition open source. It's out there and it creates an attack vector, right? And so limiting what that does, but I think we've all seen, if you use Symbiont as a cautionary tale, there are some major banks that they made a choice to single thread to one chain, and all of their applications that they built were specific to Symbiont, to Symbiont's chain, and in their own language, right, that they had built. And so what happened is they are now trying to port onto other chains, and the idea of having the ability to build your application behind a blockchain hub that might sit on top of 9, 10, 11 chains is that the logic function is behind, and the attack surface of the smart contract order of operations compute and on chain is smaller. And this is an issue, right, about where is compute going to be? How evident is it going to be as we do these securities processing on the cash flows for dividends, capital calls, funds, et cetera? And I think, Bruce, that gets very much to what you're talking about, right? The future of Apex, right? Where you talk about being an administrator of compute functions that are on multiple chains, that you're pushing data through all sorts of different compute functions on behalf of digital asset funds, where you're both custodian and you're actually processing data raw data that informs the performance of that fund or that asset, right? And I think this is all part of it, right? In where does the DApp sit versus app, you know, in how much of a risk do you have by single sourcing for a financial institution to one chain that right now, just very publicly, we know there's a number of very big banks that have that are in the risk management and mitigation business because of Symbiote.
Back up a bit there, because we're never going to single source to one chain. So like we can't even agree on a charge cord for our phones, so we're not going to get that figured out. And you know, seriously, if you think of, but go back to what you were saying, you know, about like ultimately we want to automate digital TA, and we spend a lot of time strategically and getting our hands dirty, figuring out what that actually means here. But let's back up a bit. So if you think of who our client base is, and they're GPs, they're alternative funds, and I've been an alternative fund manager for the majority of my career. So I come into this thing from the point of view that, let's be frank, administrators and custodians are a necessary evil when you're an asset manager. They're difficult to deal with, but I would never buy an asset, a security that wasn't held in arm's length custody. I would never sell one. I would never administer one that wasn't held in arm's length custody. So it's a go, no go for us from that point of view. But let's think realistically. If what we're trying to do is help our clients sell more product, right? So you know, if they want to distribute, and we're agnostic regionally, you know, I wake up and deal with Middle East and then Europe, UK, and then Bermuda, US, and go have a rest and then start dealing with Singapore at night. Basically, we're agnostic. If our client wants to distribute product and there is demand in Singapore or there's demand in Switzerland, then if we have created or helped them create a tokenized version of their fund because there is demand for that in that product, we want to help them sell that product. You know, do I have to figure out, you know, is what we have helped them create able to be listed and traded in Switzerland, in Singapore, in the US, in like, you know, time out. Like the client needs me to figure that out. That they said, look, let's go back to square one. I want to sell products. So there's me, the asset manager. I have a distribution relationship. Someone says they have demand. You know, they're increasing. I'm realizing our role is to help them figure out all the other stuff. How do I lift the entire operations of this new offering onto blockchain so that, you know, my clients think, wow, this is great. I can subscribe in a nanosecond. I have great transparency. I'm going to have liquidity. Well, we don't have that liquidity unless our client, the asset manager, has access to different regions through different exchanges, through different ways of doing it. And if we can't figure out how to make the structure of their product talk to that region, talk to whatever the mode of trading is in that region for distribution on a primary or on a secondary basis, then we don't have a clue what we're doing. Our job is to figure that out. And really, at the end of the day, Apex is a rules enforcer, right? And I guess in our industry now they're calling it Oracle, but that's basically it. And you know, we will figure this out. But I see Pat your hand up. I'm not harboring any illusions that we're going to find a way to agree on everything. We have to find a way. We have to find a common language.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spent about a year just along those lines, and we're very close to announcing partnerships rather than putting people on the ground, maybe one or two, but with other similar types of structures like us on the ATS side. You know, what we are hoping for is a global listing, right? So you know, our platform can take any tokens, for instance, and that's what you're referring to in regards to a standard, regardless of the chain, right? Because we are going to have that multi-chain opportunity. But the global listing idea is a decade away at the earliest, because the legalities and working within the regulatory systems of each of these major venues is just not there. And it won't be there for some time, and it's not high on their priority list. But cross-border types of cross listings has been around for decades, right? More than decades. So that's the approach that we'll be taking. We've spent a lot of time on the legalities of that. I think certainly Archax and Tokeny and Inveniam have thought about this. We're thinking about this. We've spent a lot of time. That's the end goal. And the approach of being agnostic to the chain and to the tokenization platform, I think, is the key. And I think certainly those on this panel would agree with that. And I think we're heading in that direction. We made that pivot, I would say, about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, in regards to we really need to be agnostic across chains. But the major issue that we will run into and have, because we've been spending a lot of time on this, and I think we've cracked the code in some jurisdictions, is the cross border, the ability. We can be 365 24/7. We can be less than that, depending on what the issuer would like. But then how do you have a cross-border listing, to your point on the oracles, without creating arbitrage opportunities, like what happened with crypto 3-4 years ago, or at times even today on smaller exchanges. So that's the real issue that the regulators are honing in on, and we don't have an answer as of yet to integrate, but we're heading in that direction.
I've got
I'm sorry.
Pat, I just wanted to comment. So I think, and one of the things too, when you think about why we launched Base here at Coinbase, because we agree with the view. We think, we're a global company. We're in 100 different countries on the exchange and 80 on the custody platform. So we serve multiple jurisdictions around the world, all kinds of clients, and we absolutely agree that for the security tokenization to really take off, it has to still be an open market. And I think all of the players who are here today and others who, Pat, you've been so good about bringing together for this conversation, are all going to continue to tokenize and build their businesses in the right way. The standardization is going to be a key challenge across the industry. And we've experienced that in crypto, right? So it's a function of there's 200 different digital asset blockchains out there. We can't integrate with all of them, right? Nor should we, right? What we'd rather do now is, in order to get our 110 million retail users, to give them the ability to interact with the public infrastructure that's out there, that we expect to come with open finance, the open financial future, we want to make sure they can do that safely, securely, and with standards around it. So Base is our effort in that, which is we're inviting other blockchains to come and build on Base. We're inviting other builders such as those here to come and integrate with our chain. And we think it's an important next step in terms of bringing the kind of mass adoption into the public domain. Right now, that is very highly controlled inside of Coinbase. And we think that's going to be a way for one of those things that's going to be necessary for global, somewhat an element of global standardization, right?
Yeah, thank you on that. I'm going to go back to a couple things that you said, Bruce. You made a comment about arm's length custodial, right? That's not there, right? In the 40 Act fund in the 80s, the fact that somebody would custody assets that they were trading was not out of the ordinary. Today, the concept that somebody would do that is considered, insane, and that's just a good hygiene function, right? And so we've got to get to that point. And Anthony, as you had said, the custodians got to raise their game in order to do this for real world assets. And we got to do this in a multi-chain environment. We got to deal with this. We got to get to multi-jurisdictional. And as Pat was saying, and I think we have 7 regulators around the world right now participating in a joint architecture for digital asset framework. That unfortunately the U.S. is not going to any of the meetings, and which is a shame, right? Literally, we're not attending a single one of those meetings, and so those 7, I'm told, are within months of announcing a joint framework across 7 different jurisdictions, including 2 in Europe, India, Singapore. There's meaningful participation in this. And so as you look at this and say, there's some challenges that we got to get to, but we got to use best practices of what we already know. And thinking that we're not going to have a best practice of arm's length custody for digital assets, it creates the opportunity for fraud, right? Which we don't want. And Simon, I'm going to use this. You're operating out of the FCA sandbox, right? You got an FCA license. You're standing up. Your market is operating internally before you go live. Talk to us about how you think about custody today, how you think about custody in the future, and how you think about these multiple chains and how it's going to work as we go into the future as securities are tokenized.
Sure. No, thanks for that intro and context. And maybe I'll sort of talk a little about how we see things, which is very similar to what everything has been said before, really. I mean, at the end of the day, we're on a journey, and we're on the very start of a journey, and where we're going to end up in 5 years, 10 years time is going to be a very different place to where we are today. But there's an evolution of technology that needs to take place, and there's an evolution of regulation that needs to take place to get to where we kind of all want and expect to be. And that's the same for us. I mean, so where we're starting today, we are regulated as an exchange here, and we have our exchange stood up. It's not publicly live yet, but it's kind of privately live, if you like, with sort of in pre-launch mode. And we have a regulated custodian that's stood up, and that is publicly live, and we're actually selling that as a custody solution in its own right. And the reason we've kind of done both is because, well, two reasons really. One, to get regulated by the FCA, they were adamant that we needed a regulated digital asset custodian to sit alongside the regulated digital securities exchange. And when we started this journey, basically there weren't any. So we kind of realized that we were going to have to be that as well. So we have built that, but we built it in a way that is separate to the market. So our custodian is a insolvency remote structure. It's totally segregated from the rest of the Archax business. If anything happened to Archax, the assets in custody would be safe and secure. Everything is held full reserve, 1-for-1. We don't do anything with it. So it kind of, it takes a sort of traditional asset custodian approach, if you like, to the digital world, and it covers both, crypto and as well as regulated digital assets. So, but that's not where we see ourselves ultimately in the future. So yes, day one, you have to use our custody to trade on Archax, but in the future we will integrate with other custodians, and I'm sure our custody service will integrate with other exchanges. That's part of the journey that we're on. I mean, another challenge we have here in the UK and Europe, and it's kind of similar in other parts of the world, but it varies slightly depending on regulation. But in the EU and the UK, if you have a regulated secondary market and you list regulated digital securities or any kind of regulated instrument on it, the golden source of books and records has to be held in a central securities depository. It's CSDR regulation, a bit like DTCC in the US, but here it's Euroclear Crest, it's Clearstream, it's those regulated CSDs. So we have this kind of position right now where, we have these beautiful, shiny new tokens representing digital securities coming into our digital custody service, but at the same time we have to issue the record of ownership into the CSD, which is not blockchain based. It's a legacy system. So you kind of have these two records of ownership, one in custody and relevant to what's on chain, and one in the sort of old traditional world. So there is, again, something that needs to evolve. I mean, we're in the process. We have a subsidiary called Montis that has an application underway in Luxembourg to create a CSD that is digitally native and sits on chain. And when things like that come to fruition, then the record of ownership on chain for a regulated instrument is the same in the eyes of the regulator as what is held in that regulated entity, that regulated CSD. So kind of an example of the journey that we're on. And in terms of blockchain, the blockchain supported. I mean, like Pat said earlier, we're blockchain agnostic. We're driven by client demand as to what chains we support. At the moment, it's kind of Ethereum, Polygon, Tezos, Algorand, Hedera, Avalanche. I mean, there are front runners, and those are the ones we're focused on, both for custody and for the exchange itself as well. And I guess that that also brings the question of interoperability and how do you interoperate between different exchanges, between different protocols, different blockchains. And as Bruce, I think, said, the whole thing around standardization is very important. And as Pat touched on as well, we have this sort of this nirvana of sort of global listings and global trading and kind of seeing what was pioneered by Bitcoin, but in the regulated world, these things are going to take time, and as I said at the start, it's the very early part of a very exciting, but a journey that's going to take some time.
Simon, just one thing, like I don't think that we'll have any ubiquitous global listing capability, just as we don't in TradFi. Like if I want to list my company, if it's a mining company, and make it listed in the UK, probably Canada, maybe even Australia, South Africa. But you have to go through an individual process with each jurisdiction, with each exchange. And I'm just saying that's arbitrage happens organically. Like people trade, they buy it cheap, sell it expensive. Arbitrage is not something we have to plan. It just happens. But I think that we're just going to have the connective layer will just be listing sponsorship or helping translate an asset, a tokenized fund, to be listed in, if we wanted to sell in South Africa, we just have to figure out how to exchange with the means of trade in South Africa. Like there's going to be so I guess I'm saying I don't believe there's going to be any agreement on harmonization. We're going to have to figure out how to help our clients raise capital in each of these jurisdictions if that's what they want to do.
Yeah, and I guess maybe. Sorry, I was just going to say when I was sort of talking about it, maybe it's more, rather than saying a global listing, it's more about providing global access to global markets in a global way. It's kind of more about accessibility than a single global listing, maybe. Yeah.
And Bruce, it gets to the point of how do we aggregate liquidity from the silos, right? When Saudi Aramco has to list in multiple jurisdictions as the largest, most profitable company right out there, and they must list in multiple jurisdictions and multiple exchanges because even they must aggregate liquidity in order to meet their needs for distribution. How much more so does a mid-level entity when there is liquidity in one silo and not in another? And what does it mean for one jurisdiction to accept another jurisdiction's data requirements, even though you have to then do the filing in that one, right? And what does this listing and cross-listing mean and multi-jurisdictional? We're going to figure that out. I want to say that I believe that I've talked about 24/7, 365 trading for years now, and I sat down with a very high-profile crypto trader recently who said 24/7, 365 is a bug, not an essential feature of Bitcoin. And I said, oh, tell me about that. And he said, because you have periods where the real traders actually want to go to sleep. And what you have is periods of very low liquidity where a single trade can swing the market that then moves algorithmic trading, right? And he said, then the traders have to wake up and get back into the game on a Saturday. And then we've learned over the last 18 months that Saturday trades will swing the market. Do you know what I mean? When there's not the liquidity Monday through Friday. And he said that's a bug, and don't recreate the bug in the tokenized securities market, which I found very interesting. Do you know what I mean? And it is changing my opinion a bit.
Well, Pat, I agree with that. Look at last weekend. Like how many of us were actually trying to? Well, no, none of us enjoyed our weekend last weekend. They make it clear. Last weekend was not time for resting. But heaven forbid you should have a client sitting with a bunch of USDC and you get a call on Sunday morning and you haven't paid attention. Like, what the heck? It's difficult. Maybe it is a bug, or maybe we have to figure out a way to manage the bug.
Well, I just want to comment on that. I mean, I'll take the other side of that. I don't think it's a bug. I think it's a feature. And the reality is the banking crisis that we're in right now It happened over a weekend, right? And many years ago, this would have been unresolved, and we would have come out on Monday, and nobody would have known what's going on, right? And I think the fact that we do have 24/7, 365 markets in digital assets, it allows us to understand risk better, and it also allows us to hedge risk better and manage our books in a better way. So I think what we're going to find is, while people do need to learn how to they need to learn how to step away from their computers, that's more of a trading desk policy redundancy thing, right? Like, you need to staff up appropriately, you need to build systems and have a process for managing a 24/7, 365 book. If nothing else, it's a good thing to have more liquidity and have more access, right? The overnight markets have always been challenging, and it always has been a balance sheet game. Like, who is willing to move risk in Asia market hours for U.S. clients, right? That someone's got to take on that risk, and that exists today, right? And you can trade ETFs, you can trade futures in overnight hours, but it's a thin liquidity book because there's not as many players that want to put risk on. That actually needs to improve. I can count dozens of times, more than dozens of times, where I needed to move risk overnight for my clients in my prior roles, and it was challenging, right? But we had to get it done, right? So I think 24/7, 365 is a good thing.
I think we should probably talk about this and have this be, I know it's throwing this as an aside. I'm sorry. And Anthony, I really appreciate you taking the other side of it, because it was somebody laying into me. And by the way, I've always had a 24/7, 365 viewpoint, and he hit me hard on that. And I think this is something we need to grapple with. You have a very good counterpoint, but I want to throw out another piece of this. We have a question that came in talking about, as an example, mortgages, right? We're talking about real assets. We're talking about how things trade. And right now, data moving through systems where that entity is a wrapper who then normalizes, like Freddie Fannie, right? They normalize it so it can be bought in tranches at scale, right? The need for normalization through a single brand or oracle into the market, or a single balance sheet. One of the functions that we're talking about in real world asset tokenization is the ability to create more efficient markets. Hey guys.
What was the question, Pat? Sorry, I missed the question.
That's I'm sorry. I'm traveling in London, and I lost the internet for about 10 seconds. Please excuse me. But we're talking about normalizing, and there's entire countries who are saying, I want to have a DAO-based, a decentralized solution for housing in my region, right? And they're pushing for these different opportunities. And what I want to do is say, talk to us for a little bit about, broadly, with real market assets that are going to be traded in the form of securities in multiple jurisdictions. What is the role of a custodian, right? What is the role of the custodian going to be? And what is the role of a bank going to be going forward when we have lending DAOs, when we have services that are going to be offered? And how is the traditional role of bank via custodian, via keeper of a key, going to evolve in this tokenized world of real assets? And the store of value is changing. And right now, people just storing value in dollars in an account. Is that going to be an anachronism in 10 years, right? When we think about this. And I'm going to throw this open to anybody who wants to jump in on
it. Well, maybe I'm going to repeat myself, Pat, but I think that we again have to realize that the role of the custodian will evolve as much as the role of a CSD will evolve because of the technology. A custodian role is to guarantee the integrity of the assets. If you lose, access or proof of ownership, you turning to your custodian, and your custodian was the evidence of your ownership, right? If tomorrow, again, your assets are linked to your identity, and you work with a permission token, and you just have to prove who you are, keep in mind that the asset will be registered on this global distributed ledger, right? Where it's always there, right? It's not disappearing, it's not getting anywhere. It's just for you to prove that you are the owner of that. What will be the role of the custodian in that sense? as much as we're looking now in Europe with the DLT pilot regime of what is the future role of CSD. CSD were there to manage counterparty risk. If the risk can be bared by the smart contract, which basically is DVP, there's no counterparty risk anymore. What is the role of the CSD? So if you don't need, again, to have someone safekeeping, custodying the asset for you, because it's on this distributed ledger technology and everybody, can have access to that, you just have to prove your identity, then what is the role of the custodian? Now, of course, we cannot exclude from that discussion compliance. So for institutions, of course, you cannot have a single person being the owner and having all the right to sign. That's why I was referring earlier to the fact that those custody solutions or wallet solution are more used as a kind of, DocuSign under steroid, where you manage permission and roles and enforce compliance for Arm's principle and that kind of things. But I think that the definition of a custodian, as we know it today, has nothing to do anymore with what we perceive as being the role of a wallet and the feature of a wallet.
Anthony, I'm gonna throw that to you, buddy, because the custodial, the maintainer of a key, right, and a custodian, and having an arm's length custodian for crypto and institutional traders and institutional buyers. What is the evolution that you guys see for yourself as far as selling additional services in and eating into what is a traditional bank role versus a custody role? How do you think about your product roadmap in this world?
Yeah, so I think long term, I think Daniel's has got a really good point, right? I think today, if you look on chain within the crypto ecosystem, you do see the smart contracts acting somewhat as a role of keeping assets safe, right? So it's locked into code. Now the challenge for institutional investors is that well, one, we know today there's a need for better cybersecurity in that space. Bridges tend to have risk, and then today all that stuff has to get improved. But also as a qualified institutional investor, you today by regulations you're required to use a qualified custodian, right? And this is all about investor protection. So I think the role of a custodian of a kind of more of the spirit of a custodian isn't going to change. Institutions will always need a qualified custodian. What levels of technology the qualified custodian uses, right, the designated qualified custodian uses, is going to change. So today, there's a combination of cold storage and MPC-backed solutions where we keep keys safe. When we start thinking about this new feature on the Ethereum network, ERP 4337, which is all about account abstraction. And so what that's doing is it's allowing transactions it's allowing data to be separated into two different buckets for a transaction on the Ethereum blockchain. So now you can separate, similar to how a layer 2 rollup works on Ethereum layer 1, you can now separate a transaction into different component parts. So you can keep identity separate, you can keep the permission pieces of a transaction separate from the actual settled finality that ends up on chain in one transaction. Right, so we think the technology is going to continue to iterate and evolve, and that's going to change how a qualified custodian serves their clients in terms of what technology we really use to allow them to have access. Right, and at the end of the day, this is all about keeping client assets safe and giving them access to the products that they want with liquidity if it's there, if it's needed in their jurisdictions that they want.
Hey, Anthony, we're coming up at the end of our hour. I want to go through a speed round with everybody. And I'm going to give the last word to Marin on this. And Marin, I'm sorry I haven't called on you yet, but I'm going to go through speed round. Is the future permissioned or is it permissionless? And when do we get to the final state from where we are today? And so I'm going to go on the speed round on this. Pat, let me go with you. Start us. Is it permissioned or permissionless? And when do we achieve that end state?
So institutionally, I'll just not retail. Institutionally, it's permissioned for the next several years, and then eventually permissionless. It might be 5 to 10 years away. fully permissionless because there's just so many moving parts. But institutionally, it's about, I mean, this has been a great discussion. The UI experience, the custodian, the fact that digital asset securities are protected, right, versus the bearer bond instruments, which are crypto tokens right now. I mean, these are very important, but in our view, it's permissioned. And by the way, Avalanche has a subnet. A lot of these other platforms have subnets that are institutional grade. They're quasi permissioned. So I would include them in that bucket as well.
Good. Bruce?
I agree, but I'm more optimistic on the time frame. I don't think we're 10 years away. I think that ultimately we know we have to go to permissionless chain, permissioned product. I'm hopeful that we have a 2 or 3 year inflection point.
Daniel? Thanks, Bruce.
Permission token on permissionless blockchain, and as Bruce said, 2-3 years from now.
Simon?
I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way. I think the mark of success will be when we no longer talk about the technology anymore. We just talk about the business use case that's sitting on top of it. You know, it's like with the internet. We don't talk about TCP/IP anymore. We don't worry about email protocols. So the time when we succeed is when we don't worry about the tech anymore.
Agreed.
Anthony?
I think it's a combination of permission and permissionless, but the actual unlock is going to come with digital identity built into your wallets. And so I think the first phase is something we're doing is rolling out DID, so our clients can interact on Base, and users who come to Base, protocols come to Base, are going to be able to feel comfort that everybody in that ecosystem has come from a KYC, OFAC compliant place. I think that's going to be a pretty big step change in terms of what defines permissionless and permissioned chains.
Thank you. Marin?
I think it'll be a combination as well, but I'd like to hope that we end up in a more permissionless space. I think part of the issue is, we're very early in this technology, and there's a lot of pitfalls and things like that Anthony mentioned, the account abstraction and other things like social recovery coming down the line might kind of reduce some of the benefits of permission chains. So yeah, I'm thinking similar time frame, 5 to 10 years or so, when things have kind of evolved and developed.
I want to say, I think the interesting data point here is that the U.S. folks are thinking 5 to 10 because of the overlay of the environment we're in right this minute. And the non-U.S. people are thinking 2 to 3 because of the environment they're in. And the answer might be both, where the U.S. is a laggard by a year or two. But once the rest of the world goes a direction, I think the U.S. may end up being a fast follower. But let's see, because as the Fed wants to preserve its right, and the central banks of Europe want to preserve their right to print currency and not have an alternative store of value in crypto, that gets directly to permissionless chains. Like there's a one-to-one relationship there, and that's a fight. And we can talk about choke point 2.0 and whether it's a reality, but the reality is permissioned is the state of the play today. And how soon we get to permissionless, I think is it's interesting to hear everybody's perspective. Guys, it's been great talking to you. I think there is going to be consolidation of chains. Your comment about the phone charging cord is maybe the best line of this webinar. But Pat, when we were talking about Hedera as an example, they just morphed to an EVM. Hedera, which in the 2017 days they were fighting on why they were a better architecture. They may or may not have been, but they just came in line and became EVM, right? And what we're going to see is standards are going to develop. They're in the marketplace, and we as providers need to deliver solutions, Bruce, as you said, to the end client who just want an outcome. And Simon, you were making this point. Guys, it's great to be with all of you. Thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate all of you.
Great discussion. Thanks.
Thank you.